Thank you so much for allowing a BYU professor to come here. Know that my heart is still with the Aggies. I was in a BYU board meeting on Friday, and we keep having these alumni who keep bragging about Utah State, and I just tell them, keep going, like, let's hear it. Let's hear it some more. So you guys are doing amazing things up here. And that's what made me, I got to come see Reagan, but I was more excited to come meet some of these amazing students that are here that I keep hearing about down south. So thank you for letting me spend some time with you. And I'll try to make this pretty brief, but if you want to, talk one-on-one or anything, I'll stick around for as long as you guys want to chat. So I won't get into my love of Utah State for too long, because I think what you guys do here is amazing. I've heard a little bit about Maker Monday, and it sounds like all of you are developing like some tech entrepreneur type stuff. Is that correct? Okay, so you're like, well, what can I learn from a research professor? Just for so you know my background a little bit. I do study research on ethical decision making, and I mostly do that in negotiations. So I do a lot of that. I do a lot of work on negotiation strategy. I do a lot of coaching and consulting on negotiations, and actually do some consulting with organizations who include people like you that are developing tech within a university, and then they're going to the next step where they now have something valuable enough that the university wants a piece of it, and they're trying to negotiate how much the person gets versus how much the university gets. So I hope every one of you gets to that point at some stage in your career here and in the development of your technology. Let me just give you a brief overview, and then I'd love to hear some of your questions or talk about whatever is on your mind or comes to top of mind as soon as you hear my little spill. But basically, I study how people interact. And now we've been thrown this curveball of technology. And now we're getting to the point where people are interacting with technology. I don't know if you listened to the podcast, This American Life, but a couple of weeks ago, one of the reporters created a voice replica. I'm not even using the right terms, you guys, because I study people, not technology. But basically, then he started putting his phone number out to customer sales reps, and they were calling him back to try to get them to buy whatever they were selling. And everyone thought this AI was real. It was having full conversations with people. So he tried it on one of his best friends. His best friend didn't know it wasn't him till like 20 minutes into the conversation, which just blows my mind. Anyway, they quoted the CEO of Zoom, who basically said, in the future, I plan to attend the meetings that I want to and ignore the meetings I don't. And he posed a really interesting question that I thought is maybe something when you're in the midst of developing technology and apps and different things, is a question you might want to pause and think about, which is, are we just going to live in a world where AIs talks to each other and we never have any human interaction? And what does that world look like? And do we want to live in that world? And so that's kind of what's been on my mind the last couple of weeks in thinking about the intersection between ethics and technology, particularly AI. I don't even know if I'll go through my slides, but basically what I've been finding in my research, so some really interesting things. You guys think on the development side, and you may have seen research that's like, okay, who are the developers that are creating these apps and the decision-making trees and things like that for AI? And I think that's a really interesting question. It gives me a lot of confidence that more of that is coming out of Utah State and will be coming out of Utah State. My question is, once you've developed your app, have you ever thought about how an actual human is going to interact with it? Has anyone thought about that and some people are shaking their heads. What do you think? Tell me your name. What do you think? What's your app? Or whatever you're developing. Okay.
For city planners.
Yeah. Okay.
You think it's cool, it's something we made. So get a value.
Yeah.
Something they're shooting.
Yeah, I'm glad you're thinking about that. You want your app to get sold and have people use it and be sustainable, right? So, and is that your only audience? Okay, nice. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. How about someone over here? Yeah, what's your app?
Nice. Basically, it's like I have a calendar app.
Okay.
I'm building it because I personally want to use it.
Yeah.
It's inspired by my gospels and app that I use.
Yeah.
I'm building my own. It's like targeted. So just to any Excel who's read the books, struggles of actually applying the principles.
Nice. So you've been the user on this side, yeah.
Awesome. Like nobody uses it.
You know, you could come down to BYU, you'd probably get some good traction there, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so an important side of developing technology or any business really is thinking about your customer, right? Here's the challenge with technology that I've been finding in my research, and you can see the title of some research I've been doing, is oftentimes, like what I'm hearing here is we think about skill-based type technology, right? Really, you know, marketing to and creating for a certain skill set that people will need to help them be more efficient, maybe in their work or something like that. I'm also hearing, you know, over here, lifestyle, goal setting, motivated type thing, how to continue and sustain that over time. Very rarely in the conversation does it ever come up that we say, I've thought about how this is going to affect the decision-making of my users' core values. And so what we're seeing in our research is that as people increasingly use technology, as you know, technology is not a human in front of you. We're not necessarily having an interaction a lot of time, and that dehumanizes our experience. And so oftentimes people forget to tie in their decision-making based on the app that they're using to their core values. And I don't think, you know, like for skill-based type app or a motivational tool, it's not always essential that core values are tapped into. But it is, I think, the user experience when you boil it down, and I haven't done marketing for a long time, so maybe check with your marketing professors on this one. But the user experience when you boil it down to anything is really about who they believe they are, who they see their identity as, who they believe they are as a core person. And so if over time, people start forgetting about their core values, whatever you're trying to sell to them is going to become less valuable. And so I know it takes like some deep digging to think about, okay, how does my skill-based app or the technology we're developing, how does that help someone, you know, manifest their core values in what they're doing? How does a motivational and goal-setting tool help someone manifest their core values? Asking those harder questions can actually give some sustainability to the technology that you're developing. Because as you know, a great piece of technology is probably very quickly going to be taken over by an even better version, right? So in order to create sustainable long-term value, people don't change that much. I was just talking to a few of your faculty members and saying, like, thank goodness I research people, because they don't change. That, you know, technology is constantly evolving. And so what I would say is that if you can help people really use your technology in a way that's consistent with their core values and helps them manifest those more publicly and be able to express those to other people and share them in what they're doing, you're going to have a product that's going to sustain for longer than other competing technology pieces of technology that haven't thought that deeply. Okay, now where am I coming up with this? Well, a couple of just kind of fun research projects that I'm working on right now. First thing is tied to Zoom. Everyone use Zoom or Teams or anything like that? Okay. My colleagues at Southern Methodist University and I we're using Zoom all the time in our meetings. And funny enough, I'm kind of a minimalist. So during COVID, I always had just like my office is just blank. It's just pretty sparse. And people would comment on my white wall, which I thought was really interesting. They'd be like, oh, you need to put up, pictures that tell us who you are. And you need to put up a bookshelf or something just to display all your books. And I'm like, no, that's just not what I prefer. There's lots of comments on how I just had a white wall behind me. And so my colleague at SMU and I got thinking, well, does the back of what's behind you now help or hurt shape your impressions? Are people using that to shape their impression of who you are? And so we looked at this combined with some research on impression management. Many of you probably don't know this. I didn't know this before I started reading it. But the first thing that people judge you on when they're forming impressions about you is your integrity. And the reason they do that is because they want to know if they can trust you or not. This is probably going to be very true for all of you doing entrepreneurship endeavors because you're doing deals with people that don't know you. And they're probably interviewing lots of other people for their money. And they're going to form a snap judgment about who you are as a person. And what we are finding in our research right now is whatever you put behind you in your screen, kind of in your little picture frame on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet or FaceTime, whatever you use, that is helping shape those impressions of you now. Because before we didn't have a lot of control over the space we were in. And now we do. We have that little tiny box that we can put whatever we want to. And so that's telling people a lot about who you are as a person and helping them determine if they can trust you or not. And we looked at does it shape their perceived competence of you? Does it shape their perceived warmth of you? And we weren't finding any effects there. It largely shapes how they perceive your character and your integrity. So just something to keep in mind when you're doing, especially early interviews for jobs, for funding, other things like that. If you're on Zoom, you really want to be aware of what's behind you in addition to, your physical appearance, if you're looking at the camera and stuff like that.
Something that trust or something.
Yeah. Sure. That's a great question. So there is kind of some one-off research in psychology, if you put a plant on your left shoulder, then that's very good. And we were like, no, that's way too specific. So I can't vouch for that research. But what we did was we took, first of all, office. So we assumed everyone was in a professional situation and kind of early interactions with people. So you didn't know the people very well. And what we did was, first of all, we compared an office background with a home background. And we found that an office background was seen as more professionally appropriate. So we just had to kind of verify that because it hadn't been verified before. But a lot of people have to work at their kitchen table, or a lot of times when you're on Zoom, you're doing it because you have to be at home for some reason. So we said, well, what happens when you have your kitchen or something that looks more home-ish in the background? And we found that when people would blur their background, so we just wanted something very generalizable, that was seen as more normatively appropriate, that you understood this was a professional situation. And because of that, people felt like they could trust that person more. So it's alignment with the norms of the context that you're in, if that makes sense. So if you're in a professional setting, something that looks like an office would be great. If you can't do that and you recognize that background is maybe not aligned with that office setting, then you blur it because you're kind of trying to minimize it. Yeah, great. Thank you for allowing me to elaborate. Yes. Hi, Cheryl. Yeah. Yeah.
In their bathrooms.
Yeah.
I encourage students to reserve a room over in the Huntsman with a nice background instead of avoid interviewing from their bedroom, because employers can see that you're in your bedroom.
Yeah.
Try to hide it.
Yeah, we did a general survey that just said it was HR professionals that we asked because they do a lot of early interviews, and we just said rank order these. What if you saw this in the background of someone's camera or setting, how would you rank order them from most appropriate to least appropriate? And what we found there, and that was just more exploratory, because we didn't want to be like so specific, like you have to have, 5 pieces of flair on your, like we didn't want to do that. We just wanted like general recommendations. And we found that a bedroom where you can see a bed was seen as least appropriate. Yeah. And an office was seen as most appropriate. So that's just kind of the tail ends of it. But our theoretical explanation is that you are all aware of the norms tied to a professional situation. Okay. What are you supposed to wear to an interview? Throw it out. Okay, white shirt, tie, yes. Does everyone agree with that? Some kind of professional dress? A little bit on the company, yes. Yep, I probably wouldn't go in my bathing suit to any interview. I think we all know that that's maybe not appropriate, unless you're interviewing to be a lifeguard, which maybe then. So we all kind of know the boundaries, right? We just don't know as well the boundaries. They're not as well established for our surroundings because we've never had to think about it before. And what our argument is that generally, if we were going to interview for the first time, we would sit in an office. And so an office probably aligns with most people's stereotypes about what's normative in an interview setting. And as we step farther away from that, how can we remedy that so that you can signal to the people interviewing you, hey, I know I'm at my house. I don't know that I can help that. So I'm going to do what I can to minimize that feeling that I'm in my house for you. And by kind of being more considerate of how they're seeing the situation, you're signaling to them that you know the norms of the situation, you're willing to conform to them, and they can trust you, which is kind of a long trickle down, but yes.
I think it's really.
Thank you.
And it makes perfect sense to me the least appropriate to most appropriate, but is trust and most appropriate the same?
Yes.
Or how does appropriateness and trustworthiness connect?
So this is much longer than probably we have time for, but the short answer is that our values are often shaped by our culture. And how culture survived is they had group members who were all in on those values and went with it, right? And so, and that's what's normative. And so by conforming to norms, you signal you want to be in the group and the group can trust you. And so that's how we get from normatively appropriate to trust, is that's kind of pre-wired into us in making that tie as we have shaped communities for forever. Yeah. Yep. Okay, very quickly, just maybe a little bit more tied to this. I do a lot with negotiations, as I mentioned, and we have a research project looking at how human beings interact with AI when they're negotiating. So this is just a warning to you that if you're negotiating some kind of deal and you're allowing an AI to do the work for you, the person on the other side is going to be very tempted to engage in unethical behavior. That's what we're seeing. So when a person negotiates with a person versus an AI, with the person, there's not this dehumanizing effect. And at least they're being honest, more fair, not misrepresenting some of their positions and things like that. When they're with an AI, they don't have that humanizing effect. They don't see, what's your name? Ben. I don't see Ben on the other end of the negotiation. And we already have a bias for being pretty cutthroat in negotiations because it's immediately a competitive situation. So we get that competitive mindset going. We don't mean to do it, but people really misrepresent themselves in competitive situations more so than they do otherwise. And that effect is enhanced when I'm not in the same room with Ben and he's allowing an AI to negotiate for him. We get that more robotic, routine, non-human effect kind of affecting my decision-making. So there are a lot of companies now developing negotiation and AI and using AI to do that. I would just throw you a word of caution if someone suggests doing that it's better for you. You're going to get a better deal and it's at least going to be fair if you go do that negotiation yourself. So that's kind of some of the other work I'm working on. Yeah.
Because, there are a lot of applications being built, in this room. Would you say that, and sorry if this question sounds kind of naive, but is just a mere transaction a negotiation? So if you're talking about transactions through applications,
Yeah.
could each of those be seen as a miniature negotiation? Then if that's true, does this apply there as well?
Yeah, so transactional exchanges that have no opportunity for pushback, or let's say it's a deal making exercise where you're trying to negotiate a price or something. The price is fixed and you either take it or leave it. That wouldn't be a negotiation. What we often look at and consider a negotiation is, okay, here's the initial price offer, but we could go higher or lower. And in that case, a human being, if an AI is proposing that, a human being is going to be more cutthroat on that and aggressive and maybe misrepresent themselves to get a better deal than if not. So it's once that kind of price or dispute issue is unclear that it's for sure finalized and can't be changed. Okay, so those are some of the things I'm working on that I hope would be helpful for you to think about. In both cases, we've had computer scientists that we've been in discussion with as we've been working on this research that say hey, it's all about the developers. We got to know how developers make decisions about how to program things. And that's certainly true and an important side of this. But you really need to think beyond that to not only what the person's experience is going to be with your technology and your startup, but also how is it going to tap into and help them sustain their values. If you can think a little bit more deeply about that, I think that's really where you're going to find something that taps into a product and something exciting that people want and they want to use for a long period of time, not just until the next best thing comes out. So I'll finish there and open it up for questions.